Hi everyone, I just wanted to put together a second video for you to do with the conversations on Aikido that I'm hoping to open up and engage the community with. And as before, don't just jump in, look at the title, look at what you think this video is going to be about, and then come in with all sorts of comments about what the art is, what you think it is, what you've been led to believe it is by mainstream media. Listen to what we're saying, engage intellectually with us at least, and put in a reasoned response, and we'll get back to you. Otherwise, just jog on, folks. I'm not interested in you talking about Bushido and all this kind of nonsense. I've no time for it. So the aspect of Aikido that I want to cover today is essentially the lack of structure and the lack of, for a better word, cohesion in what Aikido actually is. And this is one of the things that leads to a lot of people who look at it labelling Aikido as an art in itself, either ineffective or lacking effectiveness, or not what they perceive it to be. One of the first questions I ask people when they tell me they do Aikido is, what style of Aikido do you do? And I've noticed an alarming rise in the number of people that say, oh, it's just Aikido. Well, it can't be. It can't be just Aikido. There's no such thing as just Aikido. Every Aikido style that exists has its own unique patterns, unique ways of doing things, unique basis for the platform that was used for that art to become what it is. So all Aikido started as an ideal by O-sensei, Morihei Ueshiba. And what he did was, he took classical Japanese Budo arts like Jujutsu, Aikijujutsu, sword, spear, staff work, various different types of Jujutsu actually, and he wanted to create an art because of his own experiences that wasn't just about fighting, but was about self-development, kind of like Kano did with Judo, was to take Jiu-Jitsu and turn it into a kind of sport element. So on the back of that, and this all happened, I'm not going to put exact dates in, but this all happened roughly around about the 30s, 20s, 30s time, up to the 40s, 50s, before he died in 69. And Aikido was still developing even then, when O-sensei passed away and his son took it over. And now it's a family business, which is another one of the things that, isn't necessarily a good ideal. It's very traditional, very Japanese to pass your stuff on to your sons, but it's not necessarily the best for the art itself, perhaps. So what we've got here in Aikido is we've got an individual who's developing his art and teaching what he knows as it's being developed. So on the back of that, you've some of the early exponents, Abe, all those guys. For example, Abe, who came over to the UK and set things up. You've got some of the early footage. If you go and look at it, you'll see some very familiar faces. But what they were teaching back then, round about the 30s, wasn't even called Aikido. It would have been called Ueshiba Aikibujutsu, which would have been like, the kind of hardcore, harder techniques, because the softness hadn't really come into it at this point. The softness came in, apparently, according to sources, when O-sensei had a spiritual awakening and decided that he wanted to do something more positive than just fighting techniques. So when you look at some of the early concept of what Aikido started out in, a lot of it's pretty brutal, and that's the kind of stuff that I like. I like the kind of straightforward applied concepts of Aikido, which is why I also not just teaching what I claim to teach and what I do teach, but what I also teach is applied Aikido, which is the practicality of all the stuff stripped right back into how it can be used in a functional basis. Because as I've mentioned in previous videos, it's not just, anyone off the street that comes to learn. We've also got police officers, we've had people, ex-army, people with stress disorders that want to take on the more self-development, calming aspects of Aikido, which is one of the good things about it. And we'll come to that in a minute when I start discussing, sorry I've got dirt in my eye here, when I start discussing the all the different styles that we have here. So as Aikido began to develop, we had a change in styles. We had harder going into more defined, as it gained its popularity, it had to have a structure. And then we have it developing into the business side of Aikido, and then we have it then being taken on board as it started to become very old and very infirm. The techniques changed. Now, like any good martial art, students will look at what they are being taught and they will emulate the instructor. That's how these things work. And invariably, Aikido's been the exact same. So when you look at Ueshiba in his 30s and 40s, he was a strong, robust individual. He was teaching very strong Budo techniques, very close to Aikido Jiu-Jitsu style. And then, as that developed, you had the harder styles of Aikido come out. And the one I'm going to pick out here is, of the main 5, is Yoshinkan Style. Yoshinkan's a very solid, founded art. And it was pioneered by Gozo Shioda, who was one of O-Sensei's students. The next stage is, as it started to develop and gain popularity, it then needed function and form much more. And at the same time as all this was happening, he was dealing with a lot more, integrating a lot more of the weapons work into what he was doing. Now, unfortunately, when you read some of the accounts and testimony to what happened during the what we'll call the Iwama phase of things, when they were dealing with the Iwama dojo, and these are not necessarily in exactly the right order, I'm just going through everything here. When we look at what happened at the Iwama dojo, when O-Sensei basically moved there and undertook a more farming aspect to his life as well, there's a lot of story going on here in the background. The Iwama style Aikido is where the formulated sword and stick work really started to come into its own. But if you ever read any of Saito's testimony, it was Saito that created the basic techniques. O-Sensei didn't teach, here's the 7 sword techniques I want you to have, here's 20 Jo techniques I want you to have. Saito had to watch what was happening and then construct that. And as a result, a lot of what Iwama teaches is gained from Saito's experiences of working with O-Sensei at Iwama dojo. When we look at the traditional Aikido style, prior to the rise of the Aikikai as it is in the modern stage, what you had there was a lot of people coming to train with him. He was gaining a lot of, I'll not use the term notoriety, but he was becoming very famous and very well known in certain circles, in military circles. He was doing a lot of demonstrations at this point. So when we look at the traditional Aikido, traditional Aikikai style, then what we have here is a kind of a mix of everything going in. And it's a little bit like Yoshinkan in some style, but it's also a little bit like Iwama, and it's also starting to head towards where Aikido was going in future. So I'm trying to keep this as layman as possible without throwing dates and times and years and chronology and everything in. It's all there if people want to expand on it and go and have a look. Then on top of that, we had, as the style was starting to soften and become more fluid and more demonstrative, we then had guys like Tomiki coming in and doing some work with him, and he started to develop that into the more Tomiki style sports stuff, which was never really recognised as anything, but traditionally right up until O-Sensei's death, when I believe he actually finally acknowledged Tomiki style as a form of Aikido. Then just at the same time as all this is going on, and we're covering like a 20-year period very quickly here, we've got to appreciate this, we also had Tohei, who married into the Ueshiba family for a time, and he developed the Ki Aikido because at the time O-Sensei was really developing all this, and we've got to appreciate O-Sensei was aging like a normal person. He wasn't superhuman. He was doing all this stuff, he was working, he was training hard, but at the same time he was becoming older and his techniques were changing. Now I'll tell you right now, the techniques that I do now are completely different from the ones I used to do when I was 35, and that's only 15 years ago. So it's your body changes and how you work and how you deal with your techniques changes. That's perfectly fine. But what we then have is, we have a very hard style of Aikido, we have a very formalised style of Aikido, we have traditional mixed style of Aikido, we have a Ki softness based Aikido, and we have a sport Aikido. And on top of that, we've now got modern Aikikai Aikido, which when I look at it, I'll be honest, hand on heart, I don't recognise it, a lot of the techniques, as the same stuff as I was taught back in the day, because my original instructors were very much Aikido Jiu-Jitsu and Aikido based. So, and I'm quite lucky in that respect, that they came from, that I was brought up while I was already a first dan in karate, second dan in karate, I was able to engage with Aikido on a more, I don't mean advanced level, but I was able to engage with it as somebody who could already compete, spar, do other techniques, and had experience for about 14 years, 12, 14 years in another martial art. Aikido enriched the stuff that I already knew, but it was still very hard stuff. So that's where everything starts to fall down in Aikido, is that there is no actual rigid structure to what you're being taught. So when people experience it, unless they have done a tremendous amount of research and they know exactly what they're going into, exactly what the style is going to be, then they know what they're going to experience. And unfortunately, it's much easier for people to engage with the softer styles of Aikido than it is with the harder styles of Aikido and the more technical, technically difficult styles of Aikido than it is to do other martial arts. It's very easy to go out and just, you know, do a rumble, roll about the ground, do some mixed stuff, throw in a bit of boxing, boom, you're a mixed martial artist, great. When it comes to Aikido, you can't really get away with that. And because you have to understand the techniques as they appear to you. Now, not every Aikido technique is suitable for every aspect that it's designed, supposed to be designed for. Shock horror there, you know, I know, but it's the truth. In our syllabus, the syllabus I teach, there are techniques there that are there for demonstrative purposes only. I want to see if you can do what this technique is supposed to be about. When it comes to the more practical applied section, where I've got somebody trying to take you to the ground and to get you down and that kind of thing, there's no way I'd be expecting you to pull off these techniques, but I want to see if you can technically do them. You know, that's the technical aspect of it. When it comes to actually applying these techniques, what we tend to see a lot, particularly on the internet, is a bunch of guys demonstrating technique, and that's where the difference comes in. And I've said this in the last video as well. Aikido is a fabulous demonstrative art, but the majority of what you see in demonstrations cannot then be put onto the applied section because it requires a compliant individual to be working with you. When you start working with non-compliant individuals, then you have to look back to the original forms of Aikido and Ueshiba-ha Aikibujutsu. You have to look at that type of stuff to see what's usable in a defensive situation. And unfortunately, there's just not enough people right now doing that. And a lot of that comes because Aikido is very cloistered. A lot of the... And this is a criticism because I've experienced it. I've gone to other clubs as a third dan and I've been a third dan for 15 years. And I'll be honest, I've had that third dan for 15 years, not because I'm shite, but just because I would rather be a really good third dan as a substandard fifth dan. Aikido is also full of people who are graded far too high above their capabilities because they're only functioning on one field of specialism. So what we tend to get is, I've been at clubs where I've been told that my energy flow is not good enough because I'm not accepting the technique appropriately. Well, that's because you were putting yourself out there as a traditional Aikido club. So I've come into your traditional Aikido club expecting to receive traditional training, which means I'm expecting something along the early doors aspect of Aikido. If it's not that, don't call it fucking traditional Aikido, because it's not. What these guys are doing is more Ki Aikido, and that's not what I signed up for. And likewise, I've gone to Iwama style clubs that have told me that's not right, that's not how you do that technique. Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to swear here. I'm sorry, you're fucking wrong. It is how you do that technique. It's not how you do that technique. It's how I do that technique. There's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. But just because I'm not adopting the fixed Iwama style, Iwama posture, doesn't mean the technique's wrong. And this is where Aikido starts to fall down. Iwama only wants to see Iwama stuff. Okay, Yoshinkan, I've not experienced, I tend to think the Yoshinkan guys are a bit more open actually, but again, if it's not done the way they do it, it's not right. If it's not done the way Ki does it, it's not right. If it's not done the way Tomiki does it, it's not right. If it's not done the way that Aikikai does it, it's not right. But the bottom line is, it just shatters the whole martial art. However, what we try to do, and what I try to do, is I go and train with Yoshinkan guys. I go and train with Wama guys. I go and train with Tomiki guys when I can. I go and train in Ki Aikido. I go and look at Aikikai when I get the option. I can do some of that. The reason I do that is because, for me, in order to understand Aikido, you have to understand the founder of the art. And it was through the teachings of the founder of the art that all these branch styles started to develop. And I see them as threads flying in the wind. You need to pull those threads back to a central point. And once I just did a Boromir there, I don't fucking believe that. And then once you do the central point, you start to see the picture of the development of the art as a whole. And then you see things you can take from Yoshinkan. You see things you can take from Ki Aikido. You see things that work great for Awama. And you start to pull it all together. Aikido is very much a personal martial art. And that's some of the first things that I tell people when they come in. I will show you techniques. It's just like opening a door. I can't make you go through that door. You need to do that. You need to take what I teach you and make it your own. Make it work for you. So I don't care if you come from boxing, jiu-jitsu, BJJ, MMA. I don't care if you come from kung fu, karate, taekwondo, whatever. Stop looking for the differences in what we're doing. Stop looking for how everything we're doing is better on the other side of the field. Start looking for the similarities in what we do. And when guys come from different martial arts, I'll tell them, show me a part of your martial art and I'll show you where Aikido can fit into this. You know, as opposed to pushing everybody away and saying, no, what you're doing's not right. That's not Iwama. That's not this. That's not Yoshinkan. That's not that. You know, you're holding the sword in a different way. That means it's wrong. It doesn't. It means it's different. And what we need to do as an Aikido community is start opening up to everyone within our community. Because the more fragmented we become, the more exposure there is to all the nonsense that's out there on, I don't know, guys who fell out a tree and think they can move things with their mind. Do you know what I mean? It's like, gosh, you know, all of this stuff, it's marketed wrong. People need to understand that a lot of these exercises we see, I was even looking at a video on Facebook tonight and I was making a comment on it. These are training exercises designed to build timing and assist people to understand the nature of how the body's going to move. A lot of this key stuff that you see on the internet now, it was never designed to be a fucking martial art. It was never designed to be something that's going to keep you safe. You know, and if you think you can stop a punch on the street with your mind, okay, then I'll be happy to come and try and punch you in the face. You know, because I'll tell you right now, I can stop it with my mind. But that's only because my mind tells my body to knock shite out of somebody before they get the chance to punch me. So it's a completely different situation. You do stop things with your mind, but it's the mind controlling the body. Yeah, you know, and we need to get a reality check in on all this stuff. Aikido is one of the most unusual and educational and positive martial arts out there. But I wanted to go through this little bit of exercise and this little open communication on the different styles. This is just the tip of the iceberg on the styles, by the way. I could spend hours just talking about all the different styles, how they were formed, how they came about, but you're not interested in that. And it's just to try and raise awareness. So if anyone wants to do Aikido, make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Make sure the instructor can tell you what they're doing, more importantly. You know, it's I'm meeting more and more folk who are jumping on or are left there on the bandwagon of the Aikido boom that happened as a result of a certain, you know, actor who shall remain nameless, who brought it to the world but in the worst bloody way possible, both partly due to his personal actions and his personal way of being, and also the fact that he was a knob. So but I want to keep this as positive as I can. All Aikido styles are valid and functional for what they're designed to do. Same as you get in all martial arts. You know, every style of martial arts has its own particular characteristics. Shotokan Karate was designed for a specific type of playing field. You know, I studied Shukokai Karate. Our stance was shorter and the hands were in a different position because it came from a different part of Japan that was more swampy in nature than Shotokan Karate, where that would have been practiced. And that came directly from Okinawa, which has a completely different topography and environment. Taekwondo is a different topography because Korea is different, and it's, you know, all these styles of Chinese Kung Fu, they're all different as well because they were designed for certain circumstances. Aikido's the same. The difference is the topography didn't change. The topography was the dojo. What changed was the development of the little man who decided to take all the techniques that he had and turn them into something a little bit different, a little bit more positive, and to put that out there, not just as a martial art that has the potential to be effective depending on who's doing it, but also as a form of self-development, and if you wanted to go that way, a form of spiritual opening for people, if you want to look at it that way, where if you want to get involved in some of the more meditative practices in Aikido, to calm yourself, to centre yourself, all of that's there. It's not just a physical martial art, there's so much more to it than that. But at the end of the day, it gets lost in its own fragmentation and divisiveness. And that's where we want to start bringing things together. So that's a little bit on the technical aspect of the different styles of Aikido. And I know I've gone on a bit longer than I normally do. I try to keep these down to 15 minutes. But what we've got to also understand is that it's important that we preserve all these traditions. But in order for Aikido to survive, it has to evolve, it has to develop. We can still have this traditional aspect of all these styles. But if all we're ever going to do is remain fixed in these old formats, then within the new world that we're experiencing now, and I'm not talking about anything to do with COVID, I'm talking about how the world has changed, how the rise of combat sports and all this kind of thing. Now, I'm not talking about getting Aikido involved in combat sports. It goes completely against the grain of what Aikido traditionally stands for. You know, but at the end of the day, we have to acknowledge that people may come to us who are involved in that and want to make use of the skills that we have. Now, I know people who train in MMA have been knocked back from Aikido. Because quite literally, it's, in fact, quote unquote, the instructor made me feel like shit, and like I was a lesser being the way he was treating me because I was involved in combat sports. That's what one guy told me. Now that's nonsense. That instructor needs taken out and beaten over the head with his own supposed black belt. So, you know, Aikido can offer a lot to all martial arts, to all styles, but you're not going to be able to use it in every situation, in every way it needs to be used. And I think it's time that a lot of Aikido people admitted that and got that out there. You know, it's, as I've said earlier, I look at my grading syllabus and there's times I look at it and go, geez, what's that technique doing in there? It's just non-functional. But at the same time, it's non-functional, but it has a purpose. So we're going to go into that a little bit in the next video. I'm going to talk about how the roots of Aikido are steeped in old traditions, which is why we do work from the knees, from sitting in seiza and all that kind of thing. And I'm going to touch on where the positive benefits of doing these types of exercises are. So this was my one talking about the problems with Aikido in the current community, and to try and kind of highlight to everyone that don't think that what you see on any screen on the internet is just because it says Aikido, all Aikido's like that. It's not. You're seeing a very narrow snippet into a fragmented art that has further fragmentation depending on how the instructors that teach it undertake it. So it's constantly branching off, and in order to understand Aikido, if you want a good look at it, look at everything to do with it and pull all those threads back. Think of it as a tree, pull it back to the trunk, and that's the stuff that old Sensei was doing early doors, and look at his philosophy and look at how he was doing things. Look at how that branched out. You've got to understand its origins before you can understand its future. So I'll leave that one with you, and I'll get the next video up very soon, hopefully. And other than that, you know, everyone stay safe. It's still the COVID world out there. If you can get some training in, you know, don't forget to keep up your training, stay positive, stay mentally healthy, and look after yourselves. Cheers, guys.